So in 2013, a group of community leaders came together and said, we need to do something to address this children's health issue in our community, which was the issue of kids who were overweight and obese and who were suffering all of the health consequences of that condition.
I landed in Indianapolis in December of 2010 as president and publisher of the Indianapolis Star. My first job in my first year or so was to really understand the community, and I did that in two different ways. One is I spent a lot of time getting to know all the community leaders of all the various organizations. And I also spent a lot of time trying to understand what our community was about, whether it be what sports we were engaged in. I had to learn, Colts football, to what else we did in Indiana. And I also spent a lot of time learning about the health of our state. And one of the things I recognized my first year here, having come from Arizona, was that every couple weeks there seemed to be this drumbeat of some health indicator that did not put Indianapolis or Indiana in the best light. We were often at the bottom of the listings, and it took me a while, after a year and a half, to recognize that was a drumbeat. At the same time, as I met with community leaders, there was a lot of concern about the state of our health in our communities, and also as it relates to, frankly, business expenses, that healthcare costs were higher here than they were in other states. And I found that myself, working for Gannett, that our healthcare costs here in Indiana were higher than they were in other states. So after I'd been here about a year and a half, having met with folks, Rob Hillman, Vince Camponi, Dan Evans, and many others, Jim Morris, I thought, why don't we just get together and talk about it? Literally, that was exactly how planned the first meeting that led to Jump In was. And I remember we were on the top floor of the old Indianapolis Star building, which is now an apartment, and everybody came for lunch, and we had this big round table. We probably had, 25, 30 folks there, different community leaders, and it was really just an open conversation about the state of health in Indiana. And everybody shared their perspectives, everybody shared their thoughts, and from that, it led to continued conversations and to kind of a focus on childhood obesity with a rallying cry that it was something we could all get behind. It was something that touched everybody's life. It's something that we thought we could intervene or influence at the childhood level, and hopefully long-term, it's always been a long-term play, we could make our state healthier.
When I came to Jump In, I didn't bring a public health background. I came with a background in community engagement and bringing community organizations together around issues. And we were provided in the very beginning with a great set of research tools that Cindy and Daphne had pulled together, a great amount of support and research that talked about successes in other communities and ways in which other communities were beginning to move the dial on this issue. We had this great group of community leaders who had brought significant financial support to the initiative. And so for us, then the first question was, what's actually happening in the community? Who's actually doing what around this issue? And we began to convene a series of task forces to look at very specific questions around physical activity and nutrition and healthcare and the kinds of activities that were being done in the community. And again, what we learned was many organizations were doing a lot of things, but they were doing them in unconnected ways. And the more we learned about this and the more we talked to folks, the more we realized that we weren't going to change the trajectory of this issue by focusing on individual families and individual kids. What the behavioral change theories all show, what the logic models all show, is that if you want to change outcomes, you first have to change behaviors. And the easiest way to change behaviors is to change the environments in which the behaviors occur. And the easiest way to change environments is by changing the policies and the systems that influence those environments.
So after our first meeting, one of the takeaways that our leaders had was to just really go back and understand how the health outcomes impacted their business or were part of their business. Whether you're a business leader, to understand your health insurance costs, or whether you're a hospital leader, to understand really what's happening to drive these outcomes. And as we started to dig in that data, it was obvious that obesity was leading to so many of these outcomes that were ranking us and frankly impacting our community. They impacted so many other health outcomes. As we started to talk about obesity, we started to realize, and I recall some research that someone shared that showed that if you can interact or intercede, I guess, early in life, that was the best way to change that trajectory from an obesity standpoint. I remember we were looking at the younger the child was, the more ability that they would develop lifelong habits that prevent them becoming obese. And I remember that being a light bulb for all of us to say, let's get our arms around this problem.
Over to families and the community, and that's what I remember the initial start being.
And what was exciting when we first met with the group is I don't think I'd ever seen a group of CEOs. It was hospital CEOs and philanthropy and the business community and government all aligned that this is an epidemic. As Daphne said, it was locally, it was statewide, it was national, and it was global. And they were like, if we don't do something now, we're going to lose a generation that isn't going to live as long as their parents. So we got bought in with our different backgrounds to do research and then to operationalize solutions to really what was identified as a high priority epidemic, that they were all willing to do their parts. I imagine there was a pie and each of them were going to take, well, I shouldn't say pie for obesity, but they would they would each do their slice or their part of the project. Jump into the research, which is what I did, and what we pretty quickly found out and was able to share with this group of CEOs and leaders was there were places around the country where not only was childhood obesity not going through the roof, it was actually going down. So we started to do the research, where were the bright spots, what was working, and then how do we bring that here? How do we make those kind of things happen in Indiana? And what we saw was some common threads, and we showed them a map of the US and we put little stars on for where places were doing really well, and they decided they wanted to have a star here in Indiana.
So there was an appetite and a desire to do something different that would allow us to, number one, understand what the best practices were so that we could figure out what do we need to do in order to actually make it so that kids get healthier. But how do we do it here in Indianapolis in a way that will get traction and actually result in the impact we want to have? And I distinctly remember this meeting in the board meeting that we had is, like I said, so many of the folks around the table, including our hospitals, et cetera, were making investments in trying to improve childhood obesity. When we asked them at the beginning, before we undertook the research, what is working for them, what do they think works, the things that they parroted back where they were spending the money and where they were hoping to see improvements are not the things that resulted in improvement in childhood obesity when we did the research. When we came back and shared what some of the things were that did work, like making changes at the corner grocery store, interacting that with a labeling system that was used at churches, at the food pantry, in schools, at home, and on the corner grocery store, that when you put all of that together and do a combined education piece, that made the change. So
Jump In for Healthy Kids and all of the great work that we're celebrating today only happened because Julie and Jonathan and Megan took the research and the initial findings and the initial ideas that came out of those early years and figured out how to turn those ideas and concepts into reality. The three of them, and then the folks that have moved through Jump In over the last several years, assisting in other ways, in critical ways, it's because of them that we're here today, celebrating 10 years of great outcomes, and more importantly, the foundation for continuing this work into the future. Because while we celebrate today the work that's been done, we do it with the somber recognition that our work isn't done, and the community still has work to do, but it's able to do it now on a foundation that never would have existed if it hadn't been for this great team of folks who comprise Jump In for Healthy Kids.